if you want to tweet out the thing when we go live, that'd be great. And we're live.
All right.
You'll see it pop up.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this. For people that don't know you, Chris Gimmer, you are the co-founder of Snappa, which I'm sure, well, I'll actually get you to explain a little bit as we go. But I actually did a roundtable-ish podcast of the last night around the subject of using Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And the MicroStrategy news kind of was a big atom bomb in the space. And like I said last night, kind of advanced the timeline in a lot of people's minds of not only companies using Bitcoin as a reserve asset, but doing so on the scale that they did. You know, an allocation of 50+% of cash reserves rather than 1 to 5%. And so this is an emerging story. I think it's happening faster than we anticipated. But what's interesting is that a lot of small businesses who people might presume have less ability to put their cash reserves at risk are starting to do this as well. And you put out a really phenomenal piece, I think a week or two ago, giving your reasoning for using Bitcoin as a reserve asset in your company. We're definitely going to dig into that, but it was extremely well received. And yeah, I just thought it would be fun to connect one-on-one with you and dig into a little bit to the decision making and how you've been managing it. So looking forward to doing that. But before we do that, why don't you give the proper intro to yourself and the company?
Yeah. So basically, Snappa is an online graphic design tool that helps non-designers create graphics. So it's more geared towards marketing type graphics because there's a lot of people that are doing stuff on social media, content marketing, and that kind of stuff. I used to write a lot of blog posts for a previous business, and sometimes it's pretty inefficient to either contract out to other graphic designers or use more complicated tools like Photoshop. So we just tried to create a very easy to use, very quick tool so that people can create these graphics themselves.
And when was that founded?
So we officially launched it in November of 2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how's it been going?
It's been going well. So we bootstrapped the company, my co-founder Mark and I, and right now we're up to 7. And we recently crossed 1.5 million in annual recurring revenue. It's in US dollars. So from the standpoint of a self-funded bootstrap company, we're pretty happy with how it's gone.
Cool. Congratulations, man. That's great.
Thank you.
And so what was before we get into the company's approach to Bitcoin, what's your rabbit hole story for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I first heard about Bitcoin in 2017 before like really big run up, and so I bought a little bit without really understanding that much, and then it ended up, crashing and going through a bear market. And at that point, like I didn't put in the time necessary to really understand it. There was all the FUD of, oh, well, Bitcoin's the first one and there's faster and better blockchains out there and that kind of stuff. And the other thing too, at that time was, we were really focused on growing the business. So that's kind of where a lot of my energy was. And I was also, I'm also pretty interested in the stock market and stuff like that too. So I was naturally, looking at investing in companies and stuff like that. And Bitcoin is just so different, right? Because, the classic Warren Buffett knock against Bitcoin is like, there's no cash flow. It can't pay you dividend and all that kind of stuff. So fast forward to probably 2019. And I started hearing Preston Pish talk about Bitcoin. And so I was scratching my head a little bit. I was like, how can a hardcore value investor be shilling Bitcoin right now? And that really caused me to take a second look at it. And, everything he was saying kind of started to make sense. And then that's really when I started falling down the rabbit hole because, I trust a guy like Preston to not put so much money into something that just doesn't make sense. So I read the Bitcoin Standard, I read the bullish case for Bitcoin, started listening to a lot of podcasts, and everything just really started clicking. So I personally started accumulating probably like the end of 2019, I want to say. So that was kind of my personal journey into Bitcoin.
It's funny, man. I've been listening to Preston for a while, and earlier when he emerged on the kind of the Bitcoin podcast scene, and of course he had been doing his own stuff on the Investor podcast for a while. He was like a little bit more conservative. Like he was absolutely into Bitcoin, and he saw the value in it. But he was kind of like approaching it as you would expect someone who like was a value investor and had a lot of other investing knowledge and looked at kind of the whole universe of investing.
Yeah.
And like with each passing month, and especially in 2020, like he's just gone full bull,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's probably brought in a lot of people, because one, he has a big audience, and two, he articulates himself so well, and he has such a breadth and depth of knowledge of investing, and he's not bullish without being able to rationalize his position. And I think that's what is sometimes lacking, even in people like myself. We get too overly enthusiastic, and we kind of forget that we may gloss over things, and our enthusiasm may cause us to not adequately empathize with the perspective of people that aren't fully orange pilled yet, and that they don't fully get it. And so I appreciate his approach, and I love what he's been saying this year on it, and I think it's probably had a big impact on everything that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to Bitcoin, and my foray into it was purely from the investment standpoint, and then I've grown to really appreciate all the other things, like censorship resistance, being able to manage your own private keys. We run a software company, so if a disaster situation comes where I need to get out of here, and Canada kind of loses its way, and I'm kind of unfortunately starting to see signs of that already. The fact that I can just hop on a plane and transport all of my wealth with me, it's crazy to think that you can do that, whereas before it just wasn't possible. And so I think one of the important things when pitching Bitcoin is to really your pitch to what the other person values, because you're not going to get it right away. I mean, it's I think I said in the post, like I've hours into reading books, blog posts, podcasts. It really does take a long time to kind of wrap your head around all of the elements that encapsulates Bitcoin. So I think Preston has done a really good job of people that are purely looking at it from an investment standpoint, really articulated why it makes sense to own some.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you mentioned people like Buffett, who kind of always shit on gold, and a lot of people in the investment world were of the same mind. And gold was kind of seen as like the disaster scenario option. And if you didn't think the world was going to come to an end, if you didn't think the economy was going to collapse, then why the hell would you own it, pretty much? And I think as much as it's difficult for me to empathize with people that, let's use the quintessential kind of, I hate to say it, but village idiot and Peter Schiff, right? Like someone whose whole career it has been about hard money, right? And looking at the financial world, the investment world, the economic world, and not being able to see it. Like the only saving grace that I can muster is that if we're correct about what this is, then it's a once in a 3, 4, 5,000 year sort of shift in what the primary mechanism that humans use for money. And most people aren't equipped to see that when it emerges, because there's obviously no precedent that anybody not only has ever lived through, but has ever even studied, And so I guess the whole paradigm shift element of this, ironically, almost causes it to be go under the radar for a lot of people. But what you mentioned as well about the optionality that a form of money like this allows for. And that's why it exists now. Of course, I guess there's been times in the past where people would have wanted it too. But as you say, things are getting squirrely in a lot of different places. And I think a lot of people's minds are drifting to consideration like, well, what if? What
Mhm.
if I've got to find greener pastures somewhere? And to know that you could step on a plane, with just your body basically, and you could manage it so that you could wind up wherever you're going and have your wealth intact. I mean, that level of optionality is going to put so much pressure on the systems of governance that we have around the world today. um, and that the result of that pressure is probably going to be a little uncomfortable for a number of people, but just that option is available is such a rally cry for freedom. And ultimately that's what this is about, in my opinion. Much as I like my wealth going up on paper or waxing and waning with Bitcoin's moods as much as anybody. This is really what it's all about for me. And so why don't we break into the piece that you wrote now? I've sent it around a bit. I think it's I don't know if you intended it this way, but I think it's one of those kind of quintessential pieces. The bullish case for Bitcoin by VJ. It was one of those pieces. Breedlove has had some great ones that I know have been sent around a lot. But because yours is so kind of topical and current around this idea of companies using Bitcoin as a reserve asset, and it does such a good job of explaining your thought process around it and giving a description of Bitcoin. I think that's why it's been sent to so many people. And so when you were writing that, were you trying to almost kind of advertise as well and kind of build the case, or were you just explaining your thought process around it?
So I had a couple things. Number one, I've been trying to get my parents and family into Bitcoin, not aggressively, just but essentially the initial pitch to my parents was like, you need some, right? Like you guys can determine how much, here are the risks. Here's why you need it. You decide, what you're willing to risk. And I tried sending my mom, certain pieces, and it's just difficult, right? Like
Yeah.
it really is difficult to like. There's, I love Robert Breedlove's writing, but it can go over your head a little bit.
Hmm.
So part of the reason for the blog post was to literally have something that I could send to friends and family.
Yeah.
I was actually hanging out with some friends the other day, and the topic of Bitcoin came up. And I was like, I have a post coming out and I'm going to send this to you, right? I mean, it's just so much easier for me to send an article than to kind of explain my entire thought process. And then the second motivator was, I think it really helps to understand something and when you're actually writing it down. It's kind of like that thing where you can't really be a true expert on something unless you can actually teach it. And so I also wanted to really put everything on paper, just to clarify even my own thoughts as to why we're doing this. And I thought it would be great to have something that I could look back on, several years from now, and 10 years from now, and read what I was thinking at the time.
Yeah. And did you send that to your friend after you wrote it?
I did.
What was their response?
Um, so his response was he's like, yeah, I kind of get it. Then there was, a couple of the, standard arguments about like banning it and well, what if we have deflation, doesn't that mean that it's going to be really bad? Because again, that narrative of, if we have deflation, the world's going to, come to an end. And so that's another thing of, having to explain that deflation can actually be a good thing if we embrace the deflation.
Yeah.
So that kind of brought about a new discussion. But at least it helped kind of the overall, like, I think he kind of got the premise of it a lot better than when we first kind of started discussing it, which was helpful.
What about your mom? Did she read it?
So my mom did read it. I love my mom to death. She really, she's the classic mom that like whatever her son does, she's proud of and that kind of stuff. And she really trusts my thinking on a lot of things. So to be honest, it didn't really take that much to get her to put some money into Bitcoin.
Oh
And
shit.
and it's funny because I said, Mom, you need to listen to this podcast episode. You need to read this piece. And at some point she just said, Chris, like, I trust you. I know that, you're a smart kid. Like, I'm happy putting in this much. And like, I trust you. I don't need to read all these articles. Right. So,
Wow. Nice.
but she did read the article and I think she does kind of get the overall concept of it.
Wow, that's great. I wish my mom was so understanding. And what about as the decision making around the company? When did you guys make the move to start accumulating for the company?
So it was really funny because the first buy was, I think 2 days before there was like that 50% crash in the price.
It's always the way it is.
Yeah, and it was kind of that like initial gut check of is is this the right decision? But then right away it's kind of like, again, we once you do your homework and you really develop that conviction, for us it was like, well, I mean, this is as good of a time as ever to start accumulating. And so we had pretty fortuitous timing. So it was, yeah, we our first buy was like literally a day or two before the 50% drop, and then we just started accumulating from there.
Yeah. I mean, the level, like you said, once you see it, the level of conviction that people in this, or that people that see it have, is outrageous. Like a 50% drop and people are like, yes, like, back up the truck, let's get it. Whereas, a lot of normal people, if they were just typical stock investors or whatever, they'd be like, oh my God, this is like, bloody, blood on the streets. This is a horrible outcome.
Yeah, there was a good chart. I can't remember who tweeted it, but on one axis, it was like your knowledge of Bitcoin. And then the other axis was like how much money you put into Bitcoin. And it was just like a straight, vertical line.
Yeah.
And that's definitely been my kind of truth throughout my journey. Whereas like, I started out putting in a little bit. And then the more I learn about it, I was like, shit, you just get super bullish on it.
And then you water fast so you can stack more sats.
Yeah. And I think even for stock investing, like, one of my best investments has been Shopify. And and you look at any stock like Amazon or Netflix, these like, truly, great companies. I mean, they've all had 20, 30, I think Amazon at one point had an 80% drop. Unless you really understand why you're owning these investments, it's just so easy for people to get shaken out. And the only way to really make a lot of returns is to have that long-term time horizon to hold through the dips and the downturns and understand why you're holding these investments.
Yeah, 100%. And so how does how I asked this to the group last night, because as we've just been discussing, like once you see it, your behavior starts to change with Bitcoin. Now, I think this bleeds into a lot of different categories, which it's always interesting for me to hear how people change different elements of their lifestyle as a result of kind of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, their diet, their their approach to material possessions, relationships, etc. But just as far as being kind of consumed with being fully orange pilled, but also having to build and work really hard to have your startup be successful, have your company be successful. Do you find it difficult to like kind of sequester, like keep your attention on your business while this big huge monetary once in a 5,000 year phenomenon is happening, like parallel to that?
Yes and no. I mean, so the reason why we put Bitcoin on our balance sheet was because we got to a fortunate position where the company has been growing nicely. COVID has actually accelerated our growth, and free cash flow has been increasing quite a bit. And so we kind of ended up in this position where we have all this cash on our balance sheet. And, there's, you're basically earning nothing on a savings account, right? And with the inflation that we think is coming, and it's already here, if you just look at asset prices, we got to a point where it's like, we want to make sure that we maintain this, this purchasing power and the time, that we've created through our hard work. And the more we looked at it, that's kind of how we arrived at that situation, that Bitcoin would be, a great way to do that. But it's interesting being, two Bitcoiners that are running a non-Bitcoin business. So the way that we're kind of looking at it right now is, Snappa is kind of the vehicle that we can use to, improve our life, and so that down the road, hopefully that, we can start using more of those resources potentially towards other things. We're actually working on a little side project right now that's more Bitcoin related that we're kind of excited to get out. But I'm just happy that, I think Bitcoin is just, it's just one of these generational things where I think it offers a way out. It offers a really good hedge, so that all of the hard work that we've done over the last few years, we believe that it's not going to be able to be devalued by, central banks and government policies.
Yeah. I'm assuming you can't share any details about the little side project.
Yeah, we can. So we're basically, it's just kind of a scratch your own itch kind of thing. It's not, we'll see where it goes. But it's basically going to be a Bitcoin dashboard and price tracker. One thing that there's a lot of reasons why, we don't really like using some of the other tools that are available. So it's literally just, if I want to look at what's going on in Bitcoin to see. And so we're just going to throw it up there as like a free thing that, hopefully other people will get value from as well. And, we'll see what happens with it.
Right. You cut out there for a second. You said if you want to see what's going on with Bitcoin and what?
Yeah. So basically, there's certain metrics and charts that kind of I like to look at when monitoring Bitcoin.
Right.
So it's really kind of just like a scratch your own itch kind of fun little side project.
Right.
And hopefully if other people get value from it, then that's great, and we'll see kind of where it ends up.
Nice.
But we're not putting like the full weight of
Sure.
the company behind it. Yeah.
Sure. The other thing we mentioned, Preston Pish, and for anyone listening that hasn't checked out his work at the Investors Podcast and several appearances on all the Bitcoin podcasts, highly recommend you do so. But he seems to have researched this MicroStrategy move quite a bit, and he's obviously very interested in it. And if you hear him speak about it, he talks about how big of a lever it could be for them. Because I think their annual income is only something like 20-30 million, despite a 1.5 million market cap and 500 mil or thereabouts cash on their balance sheet. And he was basically saying, they gave reasons for doing this, as you have just done, to protect against inflation and for a number of other reasons. But if the narrative plays out as many of us think it will, and in your piece you outlined or you referenced the stock to flow model and the price that model suggests, which is 288,000 US per Bitcoin over the next 4 years. And I know that price would be extremely surprising to some and mouthwatering to others. But if that happens to be the case, then MicroStrategy will be in a very strong position to acquire other assets and companies in the space, to expand their business, to do all sorts of things that they wouldn't have been able to do, because to accumulate that level of income would have taken 20-30 years at current rates. So It will dramatically allow them to lever up their business. Is that part of the motivation behind you guys doing it as well?
So I wouldn't say it's the primary motivation, but obviously, so our number one thing was we want a hedge. We want to protect our purchasing power. The second thing is we're obviously very bullish on Bitcoin. So whether it hits $288,000, I have no idea. But I personally think that I think at a bare minimum, the stock to flow model holds for at least one other cycle, because there's a lot of people that look at the model and it's like, well, that's historical, like it's priced in, yada yada. I think it has to hold for one more cycle before people start being like, shit, this is legit. And then potentially
front running it and breaking it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, and the other thing too is I mean, I have no stats on this, but the percentage of people that probably even know about the stock to flow model who are actually big, people that own Bitcoin, I would guess is pretty small, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're kind of a small niche of people that are just so into this that we're kind of, studying this and learning about it every day. But going back to your question, obviously the second, reason is that we do think the price is going to go up. And so the nice thing with our tool and kind of our, our abilities is that we do have optionality. So we could, acquire other products in a similar space. We can invest more into development, into complementary products. We can develop, completely new side businesses and that kind of stuff. So, when Mark and I first started Snappa, and it wasn't the first product, our primary goal was freedom. Like we wanted to be able to create a business that could sustain, our lifestyle, and be able to work on things that we're passionate and we enjoy. So if Bitcoin hits $280,000, at that point, we have enough money where we could just literally work on whatever we want, and probably doesn't matter as much how much money that new product makes us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's obviously really appealing to us. So it is an exciting prospect that if the stock to flow model does hold, then we kind of get to fund additional products that we want to see out in the world and that we're really excited about.
Yeah. And just kind of like mechanics of doing this, how, and only share as much as you're comfortable, obviously, but how does a company hold Bitcoin as a reserve, like, in terms of managing the private keys, et cetera?
I mean, I think there's obviously different options. So one option is to go through, some type of custodian. The other option, which we've chosen, is to obviously just securely through cold storage. We run our own nodes and that kind of stuff. Don't want to get too much into it, but yeah, like it's securely tucked away in cold storage.
Sure.
And the thing with us is it's purely just a reserve, so we don't need to worry about transferring in and out or having a hot wallet and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it's literally just every time we buy, it goes right into cold storage. And
And in a scenario like that, would you use a multi-sig because there's obviously you and a partner instead of one person having exclusive access?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, multi-sig is probably the way to go. That being said, like my co-founder and I we're best friends. We've been in business together since 2012, and theoretically, if he wanted to, he can probably withdraw a ton of money, like US dollars from our bank account, and then flee, and then it would become like a legal course. So it's kind of the same thing where like at the end of the day, we're 50-50 shareholders of the company. So whether it's through Bitcoin or fiat, like if someone wants to, screw over the other party, it's possible to do that. Now, that being said, if you don't trust if you don't trust your business partner, you could use something like collaborative custody,
Yeah.
like an Unchained Capital, where one director would hold one key, one director would hold the other key, and then you would have like a third party as another cosigner. So that's probably a good way to go if the if you're really worried about or of a business partner.
Yeah. And and again, like I'm not asking this to try to pry, but just to understand how this works functionally. So again, you can swerve this if you like, but like, is the Bitcoin actually on the balance sheet of the business, or is it kind of like is it like siphoned off and put into a reserve? Because it sounds like the business entity is not holding it. Obviously, you as individuals are holding private keys. So is it on the balance sheet at all?
Yeah, so obviously I have like personal Bitcoin that, or each of us have, and that's kind of our own personal separate Bitcoin that we're purchasing ourselves.
Yeah.
And then so we'll buy it on an exchange through like we'll sign up as the actual company.
Okay.
And then that's put on the actual company balance sheet. So the Bitcoin that we own through the company is separate from the Bitcoin that we own personally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Have other companies hit you guys up, or you personally, because you wrote the article, since you've done this, asking questions, how to do it, why'd you do it, want to pick your brain, anything like that?
I had a couple people, yeah, a couple people were like, how are you doing it? How much have you, or what percentage have you put in, that kind
How
of
much
stuff. Like
Bitcoin do you have?
yeah, we're looking to do this too, kind of thing. And so, yeah, I did correspond with a few people. But I think, especially with the MicroStrategy stuff, like that came out after, we had kind of started allocating to it. But when that came out, I mean, that blew my mind too. Just like the amount, the fact that they're a public company, the amount that they've actually accumulated. And I was like, more people are going to look at that and saying, should we be doing this? And I think there's going to be a bit of, FOMO from other companies as well. So
Yeah. Oh man, I think the removal of reputational risk that and you mentioned this in your piece, that the Paul Tudor Jones allocation and the MicroStrategy allocation will provide is, us Bitcoiners know how big a news it is, but I think it's just another one of those things that got a little bit swept under the rug, because I've had so many conversations over the years with people in the industry, and they would very smugly oftentimes just cast it aside because it's not in their world. They're like, oh, that's geek money on the internet. We're into equities and bonds and whatever. But when kind of like titans of those industries, especially in the case of Paul Tudor Jones, but a large publicly traded company does the same, then you mean they can no longer call you a fool for even suggesting it, because basically the guy that they idolize is saying it's a good idea. And so I think right now, I mean, who knows what moves the price of Bitcoin in the short term, but I have to think there's a lot of these types of conversations going on in boardrooms and in investor meetings, and everyone's probably just scrambling to determine how to do it, when to do it, the infrastructure, the needed infrastructure to be put in place to allow them to do it. But if things keep going the way they're going, I think those two events this year are probably the biggest catalyst for these types of conversations and growth in adoption of Bitcoin that I can think of.
Yeah, I forget who said this, but someone was saying that Paul Tudor Jones de-risked Bitcoin for like the hedge fund industry, and then MicroStrategy de-risked it for owning it as a reserve asset.
Totally.
And then I think another piece of news that was pretty big was Warren Buffett buying Barrick Gold. Obviously, he didn't buy Bitcoin, but Warren Buffett has always kind of shat on gold throughout his career. So the fact that he now owns a gold miner, all of a sudden people are like, well, why is Buffett getting into gold all of a sudden, right? And so Bitcoin, I think, is one of these things where the more people that adopt it causes more people to take it more seriously. And once they kind of wrap their heads around it and really understand it, and like you said, there is like in 2016, 2017, even trying to own it as a company was a lot more challenging than it is today. You do have a lot more options, and obviously that's only going to get easier as time goes on.
Yeah. And I think, if you're not an octogenarian or Peter Schiff, you're going to look at, the sound money narrative, the inflation hedge narrative, and say, okay, what's on the table here? Okay, gold, of course. what's this Bitcoin thing? And
Yeah.
if you genuinely, objectively, honestly put them side by side,
Yeah.
it's almost inconceivable that you could choose gold over Bitcoin. I mean, there's a couple of reasons that you might want to have some allocation, split it up a little bit, but those people that just outright dismiss it, I think it's a generational thing, or you've got skin in some other game, as is the case with Peter Schiff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I think Peter Schiff at the end of the day is just, he has bias, right? So there's absolutely no argument that you could put forth for Bitcoin where he's actually going to say, you know what, my entire business that's revolved around gold. You're right. Like
I
gold
know, but I want
sucks.
to hear him say it.
Yeah, it's literally will never happen. Even if he bought Bitcoin personally, he would never admit it, right? He just got too much bias.
Yeah.
And Buffett, again, at 90 years old, amassing his wealth in a
Is he
certain
90
system.
now?
He is, yeah, he's 90 now.
Holy shit.
So when you've amassed incredible amounts of wealth in a certain system, I mean, I just can't see him like going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole
Yeah.
at this point, right? So I don't put, I think at a bare minimum, if someone really has, wants to be cautious about it, maybe they hold some Bitcoin and some gold. But you're right, there's no way that anyone can put the two together and say gold is superior to Bitcoin. Really, the only thing that makes the only property superior to gold or to Bitcoin is just the established history.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be on the wrong side of
that. What city are you in, if you don't mind me asking, in Canada?
We're in Ottawa.
Ottawa. So I presume now there's probably less meetups and stuff, but a decent startup entrepreneurial community there. Your peers, I asked you if other companies reach out to you, but just like friends, peers, other entrepreneurs, are they starting to raise an eyebrow to this stuff? Are they inquiring?
It was funny. I had not someone in Canada, but a founder friend who also owns a software company that's doing really well right now. But they have investors. So he he DM'd me on Twitter and he was like, "Man, that was a badass move. Really like the article. I wish we can do the same." And I said, "Why can't you?" And he goes, "Oh, well, I don't think the investors will go for it." And I said, "Well, can you not put like 1 to 5% or whatever?" And so I think it's one of these things where the smaller or bootstrap self-funded businesses like ourselves, where we don't have a investors or a board that we need to answer to, are probably going to be the first movers to this.
Yeah.
And then slowly but surely, I think, even Jeff Booth has talked about this, that, he sits on a few boards and this is an active conversation. So there's no doubt in my mind that it will happen. It's just probably going to be a lot slower than, people like ourselves that don't have a board that we need to run it by.
Yeah. I feel like there might be a market for a service just to be like a hired gun, like a startup or a small business hires you to come in for the board meeting, be like, look, tell them why this is a good idea. And you just like show up, you blast them, be like, there you go, you're welcome, goodbye. And then see what happens. How have you, you mentioned that you started accumulating Bitcoin late 2019, right?
Yeah, it was like
personally.
Yeah, it was kind of towards the end of 2019, I want to say.
So that's, obviously pretty recent, but have you noticed any other changes in your perspective or your behavior or your habits or routines since going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, having skin in the game, following Bitcoin Twitter and all that kind of stuff? Have you noticed any, changes in how you think or act?
Yeah. So I had a big change in myself when, so I used to work for the federal government. So I like complete 180 here. And I also like was investing just, initially through like low cost index funds. And one thing that I've noticed was, the longer that I've worked on my business, the better our results got, mainly just through patience and time. And same thing with investing through even low cost index ETFs. And then I started investing in individual equities, kind of 2017, 2018. And so the thing that I've noticed was just the power of compounding. And even through fitness, I actually wrote an article about this. Fitness is a good example where when you start working out, you don't really see the changes like in the first week or two. But if you consistently go to the gym and you're working out, 3 to 5 times a week, and you do that over the course of like several months or years, all of a sudden you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and you're just going to be a totally different person. And it's the same thing with like business is, you keep working at it, and then you look back 5 years and it's like, holy shit, look at what we've accomplished. Bitcoin takes that to the next level because with an index fund, historically you're getting maybe 10% a year, right? If Bitcoin keeps up on its current path, you're talking about 100% per year. And so all of a sudden, something that might take 7 years to double, you're talking about every single year potentially, right? And so now, again, it takes things to the next level where it's like, do I really need to, buy this thing over here? And then you really start thinking out longer term. And so I've always had a pretty low time preference, and thought about the long term. And now it just kind of takes it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity cost of everything you spend money on now is so much more amplified in your mind, right? Because you're thinking
For
like,
sure. Yeah.
this could be, well, I mean, you probably haven't been there, but anyone who's been in the space maybe a little bit longer, like I remember spending Bitcoin in early 2017, and 12 months later, whatever that cost me at the time was 20x the expense, in December, right? Because
Yeah.
of the big run. And, that leaves an impression on you for sure, that you better be damn sure that what you're buying is really worthwhile, because,
Yeah.
the cost could be really great. And to that end, like, this is something that pops up a lot, but has the nature of your social interactions changed, just in kind of how you see the world, and the problems that you see, and the solutions that you think would be most beneficially applied to them? Uh, has being involved in Bitcoin changed that, and has it changed the nature of kind of your social life at all?
Yeah. So I went to like I took finance in university with a minor in economics, and as we're kind of taught the Keynesian school. We need inflation. 2% is like we need 2% inflation. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. And so learning more about what is actually causing inflation, like what are the arguments for inflation, seeing what's going on in the world right now where we have mandated lockdowns, and that's being supported through money printing, which most people don't understand what the costs of doing that are. And it's unfortunate because the system that we have now is punishing the people at the bottom the most, but they're the least equipped to really understand what's going on. So in terms of my has it changed? Like I try not to get too political with friends and stuff like that, but my business partner are obviously like extremely aligned on this. My fiance, we're very aligned on this. I've tried to educate my family a bit more as to what's going on. Started to kind of be a bit more active on Twitter about some of the economic stuff. So I take it the approach where if someone is curious and someone is interested and they want to learn more or they have questions, I'm happy to have those discussions. But I'm not going to necessarily go out of my way to start like lecturing people and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it right now.
Yeah, fair enough. And you made reference at the beginning of this chat to kind of the nature of the circumstances in Canada right now, and you referenced the optionality that Bitcoin represents, and how beneficial that is should you ever need or want to relocate. The Citadel meme in the Bitcoin space is becoming more and more popular these days, and more top of mind, because a lot of people are finding themselves in situations that are more precarious perhaps than they want them to be, and there's crazy shit happening everywhere, for lack of a better term. And is that something that you've given consideration to? And if so, where have you landed on it?
Um, so I have a lot of friends who have, that aren't, over the, aren't super wealthy, and they're just doing, regular jobs. And, I love hanging out with them. That they're great people. My biggest issue with, I guess, like the Citadel theory is, like, I don't know if I want to live in some like castle that's closed off to like the common folk, so to speak. And maybe like I haven't like delved deep enough down that kind of Citadel theory.
Yeah.
That being said, I recently read the Sovereign Individual, and what I want to see happen is, I hope we move to a system where nation states, or whatever terminology you want to use, are essentially competing for people, and kind of treating citizens more like customers, and actually providing value, right? Like, I really hope that we can, live in peace, not necessarily in closed off castle walls, but and maybe this is just, I'm asking for too much here, but I think, like Jeff says, Jeff Booth, like if we actually embrace deflation, right? I think there is an opportunity that, we don't have to, go to war. I think we can have more peaceful solutions. And I hope that I can still, live with, the rest of my family, and quote unquote more common folk, without having to worry about them, burning down my property, and and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
again, maybe it's wishful thinking, but I hope it doesn't come down to the Citadel stuff. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, my interpretation of the Citadel meme is not necessarily that it's strictly like, put all the Bitcoiners behind a steel wall and live, in the good life there, and have the
Yeah.
world falling down around you outside. In my mind, it's more like, we're in the stage now where it's more of a personal Citadel consideration. Like, a lot of people are moving outside of cities, moving to a
Right.
rural area, a lot more land, a lot less population density, less opportunity for this chaotic, social
Yeah.
unrest that's happening. And, I don't see any way to avoid turmoil during whatever transition is coming, because something's got to give,
Yeah.
some over the next, whatever it is, 2, 5, 10, 15 years, something's got to give. And it's, I don't see that. I don't see a scenario where that's, as smooth as we might like it to be. And so I think that's the kind
Right.
of Citadel idea, because
Yeah.
to your point, I mean, look at us now. Aside from this year, I mean, we're living under this, what I would deem highly flawed fiat money system.
Hmm.
But up until a few months ago, most of us lived in cities, and they were pretty, relatively peaceful. And of course, different places have their problems, but we all got along well enough to live in close proximity. And I think in a hyper Bitcoinized future, a future where Bitcoin is the monetary standard of the world, that that will be the case again. It will be able to do that. The transitionary period is the one that I think everyone's thinking about, and whether it actually ends up being citadels, city states of Bitcoiners, I don't know, but it's a fun meme to play around with.
Yeah, I mean, if the stuff that was happening in the States was going on in my neighborhood, like I'd be getting the hell out of
Oh,
there real quick.
fuck, of course.
And even so, I was actually supposed to get married last weekend, but we had to postpone our wedding because of COVID-19. So, so once we get married, we're planning to have kids and stuff. And already I've been wanting to move a bit more outside of the city, just, a bit more land and that kind of stuff. And, working remotely, I don't really have a huge need to be right in the city as much as I used to when like I was still commuting to work and stuff like that. So the personal Citadel definitely resonates to me. Like at this point in my life, I really like the idea of being a bit more bit more outside, having a bit more, land and property around you, and working remotely. Yeah, there's just not that need. And if things like really got hairy, then yeah, I'd be getting even further outside of the city, or maybe a different country. Who knows?
Yeah. What's the article you wrote about taking Bitcoin on as a reserve asset was succinct, but I think it covered a lot of ground. And kudos to you for being able to do that in a relatively digestible piece. Where do you think we are in the macro landscape of things right now? I know it's a tough question, and there's a lot of differing views on things. Looking at the U.S. dollar, economic recovery, inflation, deflation, all this kind of stuff. Obviously, Bitcoin in the mix. What's your perspective on where we are in the macro right now?
Yeah. So funny story. Well, not a funny story. I was at my uncle's house yesterday, and he had a construction business, which he's retired now, so he owns a lot of few properties and stuff. But he has a lot of friends in the construction business, and they're having a really hard time getting people to work, and a big reason for that is the CERB, right? And I'm seeing this on Reddit a lot too, where a lot of small business owners are kind of complaining right now because they can't get people to come back to work with CERB.
Yeah.
And so in the States, now we have a situation where the stimulus checks are no more, and they're kind of arguing back and forth. And just the past few days, you're seeing some crazy volatility in the stock market. And so I'm wondering, what's going to happen with in Canada when the CERB runs out. My personal opinion, and this is an opinion that's kind of shared by a few others as well, is that the when the stimulus runs out, I think they're just going to keep getting extended, because that's kind of what quantitative easing is. All it's doing is inflating asset prices. The economy isn't just going to come back like a light switch, like everyone. I mean, I went to the movie theater the other day and it was dead. Like it was completely dead, right? Restaurants are much quieter than they used to be. So I fear that these supposedly temporary programs of stimulus, I think they're going to keep getting extended at least until the end of the year. And then potentially we could have a situation where they become more permanent. And that is really where I think we're going to need something like Bitcoin to offset that. So I think that's where we're heading. I think obviously there's going to be a lot more money printing, a lot more quantitative easing. And I think this first round of stimulus is just one of many that's going to come.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And it's so fun. I mean, centralized intervention begets centralized intervention, right? In a vicious cycle all the way down. And it's funny because, and for people, a lot of listeners are in the States, CERB is $2,000 a month that you can get in Canada if you've been made unemployed by COVID. And you can also still earn money and still receive your CERB checks up to a certain point. So as you said, for many people, they're either earning more than they did when they were working minimum wage or part-time before, or the discrepancy between what they could earn and what they are earning through CERB is not enough to motivate them to find work. And the government is thinking like, well, we're going to provide CERB until the economy comes back and those jobs get created again. But they don't realize that by offering CERB and taking that labor off the market, they're actually destroying jobs in the economy and making it so that they have, as you said, have to stay on this perpetual drip from the government because those jobs that would have paid them have been destroyed by the fact that they were being paid by the government. I mean, there's so much wrong with it.
Yeah, I was going to say the biggest flaw with CERB is that to get the check, all you have to do is tick a box that says like, I don't have, or, I can't go back to work, or I don't have a job, or whatever the case may be. And there's no sort of like pre-screening whatsoever. And so, I mean, you can just see like the abuse that's going to happen. And
Yeah.
so, and so imagine a scenario where next year they actually, do an audit and they find, a huge amount of people that could have gone back to work and did have a job. Do you think those people is so if the CRA says, hey, you received $2,000 a month for a year when you shouldn't have, you now owe us $24,000. Like, do you think they set aside that money to pay back CRA? Like, there's no way.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with that, because I think I mean, there will be a day of reckoning, but who knows what's going to
Yeah,
happen there.
there's going to be so much fraud in the system that even the army of people that the CRA is currently hiring is not going to be enough. And, it's causing, obviously, a lot of unintended or unconsidered social consequences, one of which is just that I've noticed just by virtue of having conversations with taxi drivers here when I go around, is that they're telling me that, people who like drug users, people that are addicted to drugs, that kind of thing, this is, they're flush with cash. So before, they would drive like a single drug dealer around to these different places to drop off drugs. And now all the druggies are going, like they're in taxis, they're going around town, they're going here and there because they got more cash than they've ever had. And,
Yeah.
you combine that with less people in the labor force, small businesses not able to afford or find labor, less jobs created, less economic activity. I mean, this is the thing that I constantly weigh is I try to be careful not to assume that these big kind of tectonic shifts are going to happen faster, like, because our minds always kind of go to the end conclusion faster than things actually play out in the real world. So I try to remember that things take time to play out, and this will probably be drawn out, and it won't be one big event. It'll be a slow drip until confidence is gone, and maybe that takes 10 years, maybe that takes 15 years, but it's just so hard for me to imagine that things can persist the way they are for that much longer. Because if you run this forward another 6 to 12 months, I mean, the economic conditions are going to be impossible to avoid. The insolvencies from a lot of the small to medium-sized enterprises are going to have happened and will be happening and will be irreversible.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of printing that's going to have to be done for the government to try to fix that problem or put a band-aid on it is going to cause rampant price inflation or rampant asset inflation or both, to the extent that the social conditions that fosters are going to be so obvious and disruptive. And I think, like, I can't see a scenario in which that doesn't happen to such a degree that people lose confidence in pricing system, currency, governments everywhere. I mean, I think we'll see government defaults, state level defaults, provincial level defaults, and because the optics of that would be very bad. Everyone's just going to get a bailout, and it doesn't matter what your size. But again, that puts so much pressure on the confidence in the currency that I feel like it could happen gradually, then suddenly thing, right? I feel like it could happen a lot faster than maybe those of us who are trying to be conservative with our outlook might think.
Yeah, I mean, the real estate market in Canada right now is just, I'm sure there's maybe pockets that aren't, but like Ottawa has been exploding. I mean, Vancouver and Toronto are just like out of reach. And my fiance is a 7 years younger than me, and so she has people that are graduating right now out of school, and they're looking for a house, and people are literally putting bids 80 grand above asking. um I mean, that just can't go on forever, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and the worst, the unfortunate thing is, the mortgage rates just keep getting lower. They're printing more money, and so real estate is just getting more and more out of reach for a lot of people, and so that can't go on forever.
Yeah. And it's been going on for a long time as well, and just seeing everything go kind of hockey stick right now. Like you say, it can't go vertical forever, but the flip side of that is, I mean, if you're at all savvy at managing it, now's probably a decent time to take on some debt. There might be debt forgivenesses. The rates are obviously low in many instances. So now
Yeah.
depends how you use that, but it's compelling.
Yeah. I mean, I bought my house 9 years ago now, and it's gone right now is what 1.3%. And it's just crazy. But the problem now is for young people, especially that are just starting their careers, just to save enough money for a down payment is becoming really difficult now, because the house prices are so low. If you have the capital, then yeah, it makes sense to take out a mortgage at basically nothing percent, and have the value of your house keep going up. But people thought that in 2008
Right.
as well, and then the actual values of the homes came crashing down. So I don't know if I want to be investing in additional properties. This is just my primary residence. So if the value crashes, well, so does everyone else on the market. So it doesn't really affect me all that much.
Yeah.
But again, like, this is one of these things where when you're artificially playing with prices and interest rates, there's so many unintended consequences, and the market just gets out of whack, and it creates a lot of malinvestment and misaligned incentives. And so I'm definitely more of a free market kind of guy, and would like to see the market set prices rather than central governing authorities. So
Totally agree with you, man. I mean, it's just the market for capital, the market for labor, and
yeah.
increasingly the market for other goods is being set by the government. And if one of the most frustrating things about all this is, like, all this has happened before, not on such a large scale, but there are obvious examples in history where many of these things have played out, and they just don't end well ever. But whether it's a historical blindness or just simply the imperatives of the system that we currently operate under kind of make it unavoidable. But it's got thank God thanks Satoshi there's Bitcoin, because that just provides such a huge source of optimism for myself, and I know a lot of others. Chris, this has been super fun, man. I appreciate the time. Was there anything any closing thoughts or anything you want to share before we shut this thing down?
Not really. I mean, I've just been super impressed with just the Bitcoin space in general, and I think there's just so many great people that are educating and working on this thing. And my hope is that I hope Bitcoin just leads to a more prosperous and future, and we can have free markets again. And yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, and big fan of the pod.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And for people that are looking for in your position at the helm of a company, looking for a resource to kind of start making the case for using Bitcoin as a reserve, do you have like one or two that you would direct them towards that you really got value or benefit from?
Are you talking more like the mechanics of it, or just kind of the thought process behind it, or
the thought process? So, like, if they're approaching a board, if they're making a case to investors.
Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the
other than your piece. Yeah.
So if you go to chrisgimmer.com and just click on articles, you'll see it there. It's the most recent one. I would also highly encourage them to read MicroStrategy's press release. I even quoted a few paragraphs in my own article. I think they did Michael Saylor did a really good job to articulate the reasoning and the rationale behind why they've adopted that. So yeah, I would say those are the two good resources. And if anyone wants to hit me up on Twitter, it is cgimmer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, man. And kudos again for the piece that you wrote. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of it, both kind of from the business side of things and just personal investors that are looking to understand this thing a bit more. So thank you for the contribution. And I'm sure we'll speak again in the future, but until then, best of luck with everything, and take care of yourself.
Thanks, man. It was fun.
All right.